All right. So, um, I did something weird with the windows, and now I don't know how to select myself out of it, but hopefully, there we go. All right. So, um, today we're talking about science happening in the context of society. And when I say this because once I had just left graduate school. Um, I left my PhD program with a master's for various reasons, but basically, one day I was giving a talk to doctors and veterans and the general public at one of the National Medical Museums in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I gave this talk about PTSD and everything that we learned from the literature. And then at the end, this veteran guy came up to me and I can't, I still don't know if he was being kind of like like a boomer or like annoying. There's people that sometimes just come up to you and like badger you for no apparent reason at your talks. But he was telling me that basically a lot of the stuff I researched like didn't really make sense in like how his everyday experience, how veterans' everyday experiences were. And so that really got me thinking about like what are we studying in the world in our research labs, and how does that translate to um, the research that we are doing? Um, And that's a question that I think, especially after the death of George Floyd and the sort of focus on structural inequality, I think and the fact that before the pandemic, 90% of clinical trials were heavily white and male. And and then we saw the effects of that in the real world. So, so this is where science communication can play a huge role. And so hopefully you'll have an understanding of the role that society plays in science and vice versa. So to remind you, last time we talked about navigating the resources available at Fancy Comma for science communication. We defined science communication. We discussed limitations to teaching science communication, time, money, and priorities. We talked about reasons to learn science communication, to think and communicate more clearly about science, and improve the conversation between science and society. So today's topic, as I mentioned, is that science happens in the context of society. And what does that mean? It means that communicating science requires interfacing with many different facets of society: researchers, doctors, patients, the general public, grant reviewers, the media, lawmakers, business people, and more. Because as much as we like our little operationalization and having like a little thing we can study, when it comes down to what's that going to do in the real world, that's not how the real world works at all. Because you do have like if you write a paper, maybe like it has the patients that read it and they're like, oh, is this relevant to me? Maybe it's not relevant to them because they weren't involved, and so they're like, oh, I don't know why I even spent money on this is ridiculous. And then sometimes the media likes to report about science. And um, I just read a study that said that when science journalists report on stuff, they sometimes exclude people of color or something. So it's like the whole system, it's like layers upon layers of really complicated stuff, and then it's an imperfect system, to say the least. Life is definitely imperfect, but the point of this lecture is to basically help you understand that science and society can, if they converse better, they can do more stuff, get more done, help scientists can help society, that's the goal of science generally. And then society can help scientists do a better job and maybe even become scientists themselves. So scientists like to think of their work, science, as separate from society. In reality, though, science is a product of people. Those people are called scientists, and also of society. So there's at least two parts to the idea that science happens in the context of society. The first part is that scientists do science using a process and report the results. Science is a social process involving how people and power structures, and just like anything else, people oftentimes talk about science, academic science, not being the quote unquote real world, but is very much a part of the real world. And I think that's another part of the structural inequality and the power struggle of like people at the bottom being like, oh, I don't do anything. It's like, yeah, you do. I mean, you're doing something in a lab every day. And so the social process can influence how science is done. And I hope that's the main takeaway you get from today's lecture. In turn, the science performed is interpreted and applied by society, whether that's quote unquote regular people, lawmakers, doctors, judges, etc. In other words, the work of using the science in the real world has just started when a scientist publishes a scientific work. So here's a term that's really relevant here. It's sociology of science. Sociology is the study of people and society. It's actually its own dedicated subfield, and it studies the social aspects of science. And I learned about sociology of science through Kelly Tabbitt, who works with me at Fancy Comma, and she's a sociologist. She currently teaches at Oberlin College, and we sort of like figured out that she really has all this knowledge about sociology of science. And it's not just us. The White House science advisor, it used to be some guy, I forget, Francis Collins? Not Francis Collins. I forget who, I can't remember his name right now, but it turned out that he once said something about like how much he loved Watson and Crick. And one of them is like said notoriously sexist and racist comments. Those are the two people that got the Nobel Prize for DNA the year that they stole Rosalind Franklin's work. And so that this political science advisor, got kicked out. They replaced him with two people. One of them was a sociologist, and one of them was like top tier scientists. So people are starting to realize that science has a sociological aspect. And it's kind of like when I realized that sociology of science was a thing, I kind of had this aha moment like, wow, no wonder like so many people get kind of kicked out of science or leave science, or science doesn't always apply to people. Or when we think about science, we just think about the ivory tower, because no one stops to introspect on the social structure of science. So, the sociology of science includes researching social structures in science and their relationships to other institutions such as the general public, law, etc., looking at ways social aspects influence the process of science and finding new scientific knowledge. So, I came up with a couple of examples of this because, and I didn't have a lot of time to do a very detailed example, but I hope to just get you thinking about ways that science and society interact. And even if it's something that people outside of science can't change, at least they can be aware of it. Because I don't know how much you know about the structure of science. Many of you are scientists, but basically, at the top, you have the principal investigator, and they've been working for years and years and years in this system to rise to the top. And then under them, they have postdocs, which are the people that really do the work. Honestly, if you ask me, um, graduate students also do the work, interns, UROPs. Well, at MIT, we call them UROPs, but they're like undergraduate research people. And then like high school interns. So that structure, it has a very significant like power dynamic, because obviously the one person runs everything, calls the shots, everyone else like works for them and does most of the work. And there's no time, it feels like there's no time to introspect about this, but I think that we have never even tried to introspect about it. So if we don't, and it's like the people that's one of the problems, is that we don't introspect on it, because if we did, we could solve a lot of problems. So for example, there's this power structure has some built-in racism and sexism. Black researchers, you can find the studies here. I just cited them. I didn't take the time to Google the studies, but if you Google them, they're definitely there, and you guys can email me. I'll be happy to send those to you. Racism. So Black researchers are less likely to receive. So here in the US, the National Institutes of Health is the main source of science funding. And this was the system that Vannevar Bush created. He was the first science advisor, presidential science advisor. He had this idea that the government should fund health research to help everyone in society. And so that's how we have the grant funding done in appropriations each year by Congress, giving money out to National Institutes of Health, NASA, National Science Foundation, all of the federal agencies that are the main places where biomedical research gets done. But in this process, for many reasons, actually, Black researchers are less likely to receive grants. One reason is that they're less likely to get cited. And as you know, in publish and perish world, if you don't get cited, you're basically gone, because like you have to get cited. It's kind of like getting retweets almost. Like you have to make yourself known. And obviously more established researchers it's easier for them. It's easier for people that have traditionally been in the system to get grant funding. And this is one of those things that really grinds my gears because being a woman in science, I have seen this happen time and time again, and it's just easy to see someone and be like, "Oh, wow, I feel bad for you." And then, like, they might, like, see someone and then they're just not in your lab anymore, but, because of maybe they had a bad time, maybe they found something else they like to do, not just people like with respect to race, but also sexism and just like the culture of science. And I was going to say something else, but I forgot my thought. But yeah, hold on, let me see if I can get my thought back. No, I think my thought is basically gone. But that's okay. So there's that aspect that if Black researchers are less likely to receive grant funding is the only way you can be an academic scientist. So how are they going to be scientists? The answer is, I guess they aren't scientists. And maybe that's why before the pandemic, 95% of research done was on white male human subjects, was on white male people, just because the reason was back then, no one even thought about, oh, should we balance on diversity? We should just report the percentage we have. But it's okay if all of our participants are white, or okay if all of our participants are male. And I don't know if you watched the State of the Union, but Joe Biden just announced this initiative to actually do research on women, which is like kind of insane if you ask me, because um, but this has to do with the way science is run, and you can see this in the game development world also. If people that are developing the games are like a specific, just one race or just one life experience, or just one background, the game lacks the richness that it would have from a bunch of many people of different backgrounds and ethnicities, and just different people with different life experiences and different perspectives. So yeah. Okay, so then also sexism. So we could talk about this for a while, and that's a huge issue, and people are now, especially after the pandemic, the problem solving nature, it's hard to gatekeep in a national and global emergency. So I feel like my personal opinion is that, especially because the pandemic involved literally every single person on this planet, that it's a lot harder to gatekeep when like there's no it's more immoral to gatekeep such on that level in a pandemic, and people are needed that can act quickly, and that it takes everyone. And I think that we kind of, and we saw what the effects of the pandemic was on the racial aspects of the pandemic. I reported a story that got accepted to NPR, but then it got pulled because there was too much news happening in August 2021 about a woman that was a Black woman. She got COVID. She had long COVID. She knew she had long COVID. She kept going to doctors. They refused to diagnose her with long COVID. And finally, she went to a Black doctor, two Black doctors, and they were like, "We see you, we hear you. You totally have long COVID." And then by that time, even though she was insured, she actually was bankrupt. So um, I think she's a little bit better off now. So and she what ended up happening is federal agencies basically like asked her to provide her input and experience to help develop some guidelines for doctors to diagnose long COVID. So um, but we don't want our things to happen that are that bad in society. So what's the role of science research in that? I mean, that's a really good discussion question, but we kind of see this happening everywhere, not just in science. And it's really beyond time for us to sort of reckon with these issues. And a lot of people have been experiencing this and not even talking about it, just because what's the point of talking about something that probably won't go away? Okay, so then sexism. There was a paper that came out that was about women in science, and it basically said if you want to be successful in life, don't opt for a woman mentor. And so um, it was like a statistical analysis, and the statistical analysis basically just like discovered sexism, and that paper got retracted. Um, and I interviewed the women that wrote one of the retraction papers. They were like based in Arkansas, and they were just talking about, yeah, this is like literally um, there's a lot of reasons not to publish a paper that states if you want to be, I mean, in a way, like it's true. If you want to be successful in science, maybe don't opt for a woman mentor. If you, because of the reasons that I talked about, like because women are less likely to be cited, just like Black researchers. Other marginalized researchers are obviously less likely to be cited. People don't know about their work. Maybe they don't have the resources to put themselves out there. Obviously, you have to go up the social ladder. And so that's going to be really tough if you're marginalized already. Um, even schools that have diversity programs, um, those can be imperfect because sometimes I've heard Black researchers say that their programs do diversity initiatives, but then they don't really. They just like have a diversity initiative to have a diversity initiative, and then what is the real effect of that? So I think like if I was to solve this problem of why is this important, it's because it wastes our money as taxpayers, it wastes our time as taxpayers, it wastes the time of scientists that are marginalized, it wastes their life, their money. There's like stories, so many horror stories of people in science just completely like losing their entire livelihoods because of this. And so um, I would love to see more and more scientists study this. And I've seen some studies coming out that are like literally showing like not like if you want to be successful in science, get a women mentor. Because I've had women mentors that I feel like I'm successful in science. Um, but like here's the data on this power inequality in science, and like if you scientists introspect on the way that we do science, that's a great way to incorporate sociology of science and interest us so we can move forward. So I've already kind of talked about what are the effects on these. I kind of said a lot about this, so let's move on. So here's the second one. I've already talked about this as well. COVID science communication. COVID pitted scientists versus the real world, scientists versus everyone. Um, so, but the problem that I saw in COVID, which I thought it was really bizarre, was scientists were not, it wasn't, it was like, it was just mind boggling. It wasn't bizarre because scientists were working really hard and they were like on the news. They're like, hey guys, here's the science. I know you don't understand the science. I'm explaining the science to you. They explained it. They couldn't do it in a way that was apolitical. And I think the reason was that politicians and everyday people, they and science, they weren't all in the same discourse. They were in their separate discourses. Government had its own discourse. Everyone got afraid that people would get kicked out of their offices. People called in and said, you better not put a vaccine mandate or a mask mandate on my district because I will vote you out of office. And of course, what do government people do? They just listen to their constituents because that's their job. Their job isn't to be scientists. So there was a communication failure there, and it was from scientists partly. I mean, like, think of all the successes scientists had in communicating science and all the people that did get vaccinated. But there was also some failures that persist, and our society was already so fractured, and it just got even more fractured. And so some scientists disagreed with each other. And the other part that was really hard was journalism did not dovetail well with science. So government didn't do a good job of informing people. Industry didn't could have maybe done a better job of informing people. Scientists disagreed among themselves. Journalists amplified the opinions of those scientists they found the most relevant, which may have not been um, the most like views that resonate with people. So that there was this sort of like thing of like, oh, here's the science as journalist reports it, and it kind of like dampened informed alternative views and like vaccine hesitancy, and people that didn't understand vaccines were like kind of made fun of. So COVID science, as a result, the end result was COVID science became politicized to the point where the GOP judiciary tweeted, if vaccines work, why don't they work? And then they later deleted that tweet. But that still was like literally one of their talking points. And it became the subject of political spin. And obviously that killed thousands of people because we know that vaccines actually, with some exceptions, which is why you should talk to your doctor about them, is vaccines help people stay alive in the pandemic. So I don't know what was up with the discourse there, but it was such a bizarre discourse that it kind of like made the science secondary to the actual conversation because people didn't have questions about the science. They were like, oh, I want to go see my family. Um, I want to go to our big gathering for Thanksgiving. And then they didn't get the vaccine. I mean, who knows? Like, I did this whole video with Santiago Giesler about this discussion and the fact that scientists believe that vaccines work for the most part. And the tough part is, why don't people agree with scientists? And I think that science communication can improve the dialogue there because I wonder if scientists have this chat with society, I think that they will learn a lot about what society values. And honestly, the answer to that is probably not science. They value their own personal life and life experience and ways to improve their own life. And as scientists, our values are very different. And we like to believe that we're scientifically informed, and we are scientifically informed as scientists, but there's also this whole social component that would be improved by having a dialogue between science and society. So, communicating science better so that limitations aren't glossed over and can be addressed, help scientists communicate and gain insight into real world problems, raise awareness about sexism, racism, structural inequality. That I honestly believe and I know that whenever there's structural inequality in an organization, that makes the organization less able to fulfill its mission because it's kind of like, it's like I can't think of the word right now, but it's like when you try to do something good, but it's like a paradox. It's like a hypocrisy of sorts. Like, for example, doctors, that I learned during my story about medical racism, that doctors, they think of themselves as healers, yet a lot of the choices they take actually end up like harming people, and not even just marginalized people, but just like other, so like patient safety as like a concept. And that's something that can only be improved uh, by introspecting on the practice of medicine. And that's what medical people are doing. And that's why patient safety experts are on the president's science advising panel, because it's like a huge deal, especially after COVID. So I think that science has to do this too. And focusing on the social aspects of science, culture of science can improve science and just make it more reflective of the people it serves. And then kind of like remove this barrier, like, oh, you can't be a scientist because XYZ, because everyone can be a scientist. Like, we all can think, we can all analyze data. Why are we gatekeeping science? That's one thing that really annoys me. So here's some things that I have to increase science society dialogue in science through science communication. Talk to people about your science. If you do human subjects research, talk to the people who have the condition you're studying. Do the challenges they face match up with your data? What's missing from the data that your patients struggle with? See what the media is saying about your subject in the news. Are there misconceptions? Have they offered up analysis that criticize what the research says because it doesn't quite fit the real world? Do the journalists find it confusing? The media, I find that when media finds something to be confusing, that's like a huge problem because the media is the one giving out all the information. So I feel like even if the journalists and media and scientists had a better conversation, that would probably go really far. And obviously, this one's, I think, really hard because uh, it's something, it's one of those things that we just have to do. Seek to amplify the work of marginalized scientists who are pursuing science despite unbalanced power structures that hold them back, because oftentimes these people don't have any real support in their program. And it's and I think that we shouldn't discount the sexism, and that we should definitely try to have an open mind about science and not think about science as being like those really frazzled, absent-minded old guys, like have an international perspective. Everywhere does science because science is an international endeavor. So here's a image that I created, and it's on one of our blogs. Science doesn't happen in a vacuum. So here we have science. Here we have society. The arrows flowing from science to society. Science gets improved through society gets improved through science. Better cancer cures, better treatments for stuff. Then society influences science. Hope in my mind, hopefully. Telling scientists like, hey, here's my problem that I have with my health, and like, you didn't, here's one way that it could be improved, and that could give you like new grant ideas. So working with patients directly, a lot of times scientists don't work with patients directly, and then they'll like meet, like there was one guy, he visited the AIDS wall in Washington, D.C. when he was working at the NIH. And he didn't even, and that was during the time when all the people in San Francisco, the AIDS epidemic, and he found that so moving. And I work at a VA hospital, and I talked to some PTSD, veterans with PTSD, and I found that so interesting because it's it's wild that sometimes what they say matches up exactly with the literature, but other times there's nuance that I personally have not found in literature. And I've been reading literature. I've been working on a paper for like 2 years, and their insights are still so new and different than what I see in the research. So there's a lot of different aspects here. Society shapes scientists, influencing their expectations, et cetera, because we're all just people and we are in society. Public input into biomedical science research, for example, from patient groups, citizen science, which is the idea that anyone can be a scientist. Like if you get your phone, take pictures of butterflies, send it to, oh, I forget who's doing that research, like the environment department in the government, or like NASA has a lot of these citizen science things. Biases coming from who looks like a scientist, like, oh, like for a while when I flew on planes, I would tell people, they're like, oh, what do you do? And I'd be like, oh, I'm a neuroscientist. And they would always, without fail, say, oh, you're a nurse? And I was like, no, I'm not a nurse. I'm a neuroscientist. But I guess I must have said it weird and they didn't hear me. But so I just pretend to be a nurse. And so that honestly kind of killed my my confidence a bit, because like here I was, but I mean it's not like nurses don't do something important, but I was like, I'm a neuroscientist, like I'm a scientist, and they're like, oh, you're a nurse, because nursing is so stereotypically female, while neuroscience is not stereotypically female at all. So stuff like that matters a lot. It matters for society, it matters on the individual level. If you Because we have this huge problem now where here in the US, other nations are investing more in their science workforce than we are. And so, if we have all these social problems, we're not going to be able to tackle the 21st century challenges that exist. And I think this is something our government definitely knows, and our government definitely is working on improving. So, I just really think that it's important for scientists to have this discussion, and obviously, science communication plays a huge role in this. So, that's the whole lecture that we had today. I definitely rambled a lot, but hold on, let me quit the recording and we can do the discussion.